All right, Brooke, good afternoon. How's it going?
Conrad, how are you? I got some cool news. My baby just turned 21, and she
It's a
just went to the
concerning
liquor
age.
store. She just went to the liquor store and bought her very first liquor, and it was kind of a fun experience when I'm there with her, and the guy's looking at me and looking at her, and he's like, "What's going on here?" And then we're like, "All right, it's her first experience." So, of course, she had to buy like a 12 pack of White Claws.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I think that's what most of the 21-year-old girls drink. So amazing that she went 21 years without sipping a bit of alcohol. Actually, I have a fun story there. It wasn't the first time. The second time I ever bought alcohol as a 21-year-old, they didn't even ask for my ID. I put like a 6-pack on the counter and I'll like have my ID in my hand, like ready for them to hand it to them. And he just scanned it and was like, whatever, $9. And then I handed it to him and I'm like, that seems wrong. I mean, not that I look that old or young or whatever, but you should probably ID someone who just turned 21 like 2 weeks prior. And that didn't happen to me. So hopefully she got the pride of handing over her ID and going from there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Brooke. We got Mike with us today. I'm curious if you recall. We'll do a little intro to Mike here in a second. But how did you originally connect with Mike? What was the origin story there?
So, Mike, I don't even know if you remember this, but when I first started Vantage, my business partner owned one of the largest travel vacation clubs in the country, and he rents out properties kind of in bulk a lot of times, and he'll go into a condo building and maybe rent 10, 20, 30 units, something like that. And I think I just Outer Banks was a very popular market for vacation club, and I somehow reached out to Mike. Mike was a newly, CEO at the company down there, and we both went to East Carolina, so we kind of had some shared interest there and shared backgrounds. And Mike was nice enough to meet with me down there, and I think that was it, Mike, wasn't it? Am I messing up our story here?
Yeah, I remember that very clearly. This guy calls me up. He's like, "Hey, can I rent all these condos that you guys have?" And I'm like, "What?"
Sounds like wire fraud. Yeah.
Who does that?
We would have rent 20 units for the entire summer, from May 1st through October 31st. Yeah,
it was actually a condo project. We represented the developer, so we were sales and rental, and this was 08, 09 timeframe. So like after the Great Recession, these things were not moving at all. So it was a very interesting proposal. And the guy I brought it to the developers, they thought of it. But yeah, that's definitely, I remember that. That was before Brooks, the famous Brooke now.
That was I probably had that was Brooke with like 10 properties under management. So Mike's looking at me like, who the hell is this punk? Like had we not gone to East Carolina together, he probably would never return my phone call.
Well, Mike's a legend to East Carolina now, and I think you've got some stuff named after you there. But we're skipping too far ahead, Mike. Perhaps let's go back to the beginning a little bit, if you don't mind. So people listening perhaps haven't heard of you. I can't imagine they've been paying attention for very long, if that's the case. But if you wouldn't mind, Mike, just a little bit of background about you, kind of your entrance in the space, and where you sit today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. I listened to all of them. So Mike Harrington, I formerly had a company called Carolina Retreats. We managed about 400 properties in the southeastern coast of North Carolina, based out of Surf City, Topsail Island, and then we had operations in Wrightsville Beach, Carolina Beach, Oak Island. So been in the business since '05. My very first job was front desk at a place called Hatteras Realty on Hatteras Island, North Carolina, by the legendary Stuart Couch. He hired me for my first gig out of school, and kind of fell in love with it ever since, and been in that business until 2022 when we sold to V-Trips. So now I am a free agent and running our own assets in our new iteration of our company called Carolina Resort Company.
Right on. Awesome. Well, I know there's a lot of experience kind of wrapped up in that journey from 2005 to 2022. So if you guys are okay with it, perhaps we'll dive right in and go through some of these mistakes, and then we could paint in some additional context and color, I'm sure, as we go along. So yeah, if you're okay, Mike, we'll dive right in. Number one, you mentioned in the book, overcomplicating what we do, meaning the property management side of things. It's easy to get distracted with things that don't really move the needle and improving performance for either homeowner or guest. Keep it simple. What were some things that come to mind, Mike, that you did during your time operating that sounded, shiny object, or it was overcomplicating it that you later maybe got rid of and didn't see any impact from?
Yeah, look, I was certainly at fault for this. I mean, everything caught my attention, in business. And but at the end of the day, I mean, what it comes down to is, you're a fiduciary for your client, which is the homeowner. And you also, your customer or the guest, you have a duty to them to provide safe, clean, habitable great experience. And, a lot of times we would get into, certain softwares or these new gimmicks or these new ads, whatever it was, and it just really didn't provide that value. Homeowners want, number one, they want their homes rented when they have it open for rent, and they want it taken care of. If you go back to, the first principles thinking, which is a big, that's what you got to concentrate on. So any decision you make, does it help one of those two things? And if it doesn't, maybe let it go. So again, world's worst with that, but learned over the years, and finally kind of got it dialed in there at the end.
Yeah, I think just about everyone talked about this. It's also just that chasing shiny objects, but I think you instilled it really simply, here, where it's like just break it down to those first principles. Keep it simple, right? People just want to maximize your rental income, make sure your asset is taken care of, and maybe have a little bit of hospitality for your guests. But if you break it down to those simple things, I think everybody wins in the end.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. It's also like I think some of the companies I work with, they have like departments of people. And then I think the bigger the company there, sometimes what I see happen, Mike, is they end up with like all these departments, all these people doing so many different things. And then I look at it and I'm like, is this better than just when it was, simpler and you guys had like basically people take care of the homeowners, people take care of the guest. And then a few, splintering pieces underneath that. I feel like that's also part of it too. It's just, you get bigger and you feel like maybe you have to make it more complicated when it's really, there's more work to do, but it's not necessarily more complicated than you actually need to make it.
It doesn't make it better. Sometimes then things get lost in the shuffle. Well, that's not my job. That's not my job, and then before you know it, I get a phone call at 8:00 at night because the house wasn't clean. Right. And, but you learn from those mistakes, and really, if you can get to that level where you have a team, and that team, they own that from the time that reservation's made to the time that guest leaves, really have that thought process. I mean, it's going to be hard to lose. I mean, that's really when you want to get to.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned phone calls there, so then that dovetails pretty nicely into number 2, which you mentioned letting issues fester. If you you've learned that if a guest or a homeowner, issue sits there or festers for a little bit too long, it creates a lot of unnecessary anxiety. Deal with it as soon as possible. So, what was kind of your approach as you got deeper in the company with dealing with those guest or homeowner issues that are sort of inevitable at times in this space?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to happen if you've been in the business long enough, and it hasn't happened to you, then congratulations, but it will happen. So whether it's a homeowner or a guest, I mean, if you get that email, if you get that phone call, don't let it sit there and just think about it for a day or two, because all that does is make the other party even angrier, right? They're going to sit there and stew on it and say, well, they won't call me back. They won't email me back. So as soon as you get that, deal with it immediately. And really, 9 times out of 10, when you do that, it's like ripping a Band-Aid off and everything's going to be fine. But, certainly it's one of those things you got to get mentally tough. You got to get that skin a little bit thicker and just go in there and do it. And remind yourself, like, look, it's not personal. This is business. Make sure don't talk at them. Make sure you're listening to them, and then find a good solution. So I've done both, right? I've let things sit, and I've freaked out about them. And also I've immediately gone to it and try to deal with it. So that latter route is 100 times better.
Mike, I've quoted you on this one a couple of times. I feel like I've quoted you all the time on a lot of these. So I'm excited to go through these.
I've made the most mistakes, Brooke. That's why.
Mike, if you did actually listen to some of these other podcasts, you're like, yeah, that's I did say that. Yeah. But no, this is like, what's that book? Eat that frog, or Eat the Frog. It's so true. Just get it out of the way, because otherwise it's going to linger over you the entire day. You're just going to hate it, and you're not going to focus on what you actually have to do. And to your point, Mike, like, the person on the other end is just going to get more and more fired up, and it's just going to get more out of control. So just rip off the Band-Aid, eat the frog, whatever, metaphor you want.
100%.
Yeah. I mentioned before we hit record, Mike, that I was traveling the last few days. So there was a few things sitting that I didn't want to sit, but I kind of just didn't really have the space and time to deal with them. And I ate 2 frogs this morning, if you will, Brooke. And it was like 9:42 and I was done with both of them. And like neither one was that big of a deal, at the end of the day. And I was like, well, I was all worried and, to your point, Mike, stress about nothing. You know what I mean? Once you go and eat them, it sometimes takes 10 minutes. And then it's like, I've been worried about that for 5 days. Like, that was so silly. But,
and it's usually worse in your head than it really is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always worse in your head than it really is. Always. Yeah.
And this kind of dovetails in your third one, Mike. So I'll kind of bring 3 and 2 together here if you're okay with it. But sometimes 2 people can be very direct and almost like aggressive and rude through email, but then you do pick up the phone and talk to them, which is your third mistake, and then they do calm down immediately. Like I've learned there's clients that I work with that got a lot of bite, a lot of bark over email, and then I get on the phone with them or like a Zoom call like this, and we have a conversation, and I'm like, oh, like yes, you're a little upset, but these are very fixable issues. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit too, of just like having that voice conversation with someone, particularly when it's a sticky, prickly issue, can really clear up things as well.
Yeah, we had a rule. We used to tell the team, say, look, if it takes more than 5 lines when you're crafting an email to explain something, pick the phone up and call them. And there's nothing better than that person to person conversation. You can hear the reflection in their voice. You can hear it makes things 1,000 times better. And like, I'm a phone call guy, especially when it comes to issues and things like that. Number one, I don't like to put a lot of stuff in writing because I don't know, you just never know what's going to come back. But it also helps just to have that, you can hear the nuance in a conversation. And then that person on the other end, if you have that empathy when you're listening, they can feel that, right? They can listen to that and hear that. So yeah, 100%, get the issues out of the way immediately and pick the phone up and call. Those two things, which a lot of people don't like to do nowadays, right? They want to text or they want to email, but this is kind of old school business that I was taught. And I think a lot of you guys probably do the same thing. It's like that's never going to go out of style and never going to go away. So I would highly recommend doing that.
And I'll take this one step further, and I agree 100%, Mike, and I've actually shared this with my team on Slack, but I'll take it one step further. It's like if you go back and forth 2 or 3 times on an email, just pick up the freaking phone. Just, solve it. So you're going to save everyone a lot more time. So yes. I'll just take that one step further.
100%. Yes.
I like that. Those are good rules to live by.
Well, number 4 goes long too while you're at it, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, number 4 goes in a slightly different direction than Mike, being too available as a homeowner or dealing with owners or as a manager, in the company. It's a tough one because you want to safeguard your reputation and your business. You want people to feel like you're responsive and available to them. But at the same time, if you're building something sustainable, you can't be the only cog in the machine, if you will. You can't be the only hinge on the door. You must let your team perform and work through issues on their own. So what was kind of your evolution here of maybe doing a lot of things yourself as you got started and then over time kind of delegating or giving more people more responsibility in your companies?
Yeah, this is probably geared more towards as we grew and got a little bit bigger, right? Because when you're starting up, you have to be that person. You have to be available. There's no way around it. So as we got a little bit bigger, obviously, you get to 300, 400, 500 properties under management. That's a lot. And any given day, there's going to be a problem. So you hire, and you get to a point where you have revenue, you can hire managers and really good managers. You have to let them do their job. And that's the one thing that we had to get to. And I still feel bad. Like I would get an email and I would forward it to Stuart, my COO vice president, and say, Stuart, got this email. And he was awesome at dealing with it. But then I'll say, well, should I just respond to acknowledge that I got the email? Because I don't want the homeowner or the guest to think I'm just putting them off. But you got to get that out of your mind. Eventually, you got to get to a point and let your team do it. And if your team does a good job, that will never be an issue, right? Like they won't like, okay, well, Mike didn't respond, but Stuart got it and he dealt with it. So and that's going to free you up, obviously, to do more things within the company that's better suited to your skills. Of course, I would talk to a homeowner. Of course, I would talk to a guest, but I was not the best at it, right? I'd get a little fired up and emotional too sometimes, if I thought things were getting unreasonable. But, you hire more competent people than you to handle that stuff. So let them do their job.
So Mike, I had the same challenge, and I actually have the same challenge here in the Vintory because, when I started, same, just like you, I was involved in every step of the way. But those partners, those owners, they get used to texting you. Yeah. They can text you anytime. And, I was responsive. I did respond just like I'm sure you did. But what I struggled with was, these early partners, these early owners, how do you then transition it back to the other person that actually is probably much more capable of actually handling the actual problem than you are? How did you do that? Did you just say, hey, let me connect you with, so-and-so, or it was always a challenge for me. It still is to this day.
Yeah. In those certain situations, yes, I would respond back. I'd loop in the appropriate person, right? One of our managers, hey, I'm looping in Stuart. he's got all the information you're going to need. He's our boots on the ground. He's our number one here in the market. Deal with him, and that's all it took. Just so they knew that, hey, I've been acknowledged by the person that I sent the message to. He's putting me to somebody who can deal with my issues, and then that person who's going to now start building that relationship with that customer or client or whatever it is. So that's how we did it. Did it work every single time that way? No, but it certainly helped.
I guess by the second or third reply, they said, all right, I know, I'll just go straight to him.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've diffused that before recently, Brooke, too, with humor, where it's like, oh, I'm not in charge anymore. I'll make a joke like that. I'll be like, actually, your client success manager is now in charge. This is her name. And, clients will be like, all right, I get it. Like, you're joking. Of course, you're still in charge. But just that humor makes them laugh a little bit. And then as long as the person they're dealing with is competent, I guess that's what I learned. I brought someone on my team last year who didn't work out, and they weren't competent. And I tried to give some of my legacy clients, Brooke, to this person, and it didn't go perfectly smoothly. And then they're back at me where they're like, all right, you gave me the person XYZ, but XYZ didn't perform. And that's when it's bad. But when you give them to someone competent, they're like, oh, awesome. This person's better than this guy because he's busy and he's got a lot of things going on.
And they want their issues dealt with, quickly, immediately. So Correct. If you get someone who can do that, then 100 times they're going to that person every time from now on out.
Yeah. The critical piece is you got that person has to be competent, right? And take care of their problem. If they don't, then it defeats the whole purpose. They're going to come back to you every time.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. I think you nailed it, Brooke, there. No. Well, number 5 then, kind of going again in a slightly different direction, not reevaluating vendors and service providers enough. You're loyal to those who do what they say they'll do and they do good work, but it's also imperative to consistently audit and verify those relationships are still providing value to the business as it evolves. Do it, reevaluate those relationships. How did you kind of find this process, or what's the right cadence, I guess, for reviewing some of these relationships over time?
Things evolve in business, right? Over the years, what you did 3 or 4 years ago may not be applicable now, just the way things change. So, a lot of times people want this like catch-all, fix-all solution, right? They're going, all right, I'm going to pay, so many dollars a month for this. Boom, that's taken care of in perpetuity. Well, that's not how it works, So you really have to look at it, and we look at it usually annually. We did budgeting, and we start going through this stuff and be like, wow, we really. Is this really providing value? Is this really driving, revenue where we want it, or cost cuts, or what? So, and it's almost like you have an employee, right? Especially people you work with for a long time. I don't want to go and be like, hey, Conrad, thanks for all the years of service, but Google doesn't matter anymore, or whatever it is, So. It's tough, but I think you kind of owe it to the business to look at these things every year, make sure that they're providing value, and then go from there. So we've done it. I've learned the hard way, and we've gone through these processes. It's a great exercise, especially financially, for your business. Mm-hmm. So I would highly suggest doing that.
This reminded me of when COVID hit. We were about a year in to Vintory, and cost creep is a real thing. And you can start adding all these different features and all these different products and all these different software platforms. And next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, we got a lot. I mean, we were only a year old and COVID hit, and I was like scrambling because everybody was canceling me and everybody was pausing on my account. So I did the same thing. I reciprocated in kind for that month there. But it was amazing just how many little things added up that you really don't catch. And you need to do that process and go through and because again, cost creep is definitely a real thing.
I was talking to somebody, or I don't know where I heard this, but every year or every 2 years, they'd take their business credit card and they would cancel it, right?
Yeah.
and they would issue a new one. And I'm like, that is genius.
Really?
I have no idea what's on mine.
That's the brilliant way to do it, right?
Yeah. And I think the hook in that one too, Mike, is don't allow the previous vendor to charge it again. And then I think inside of a larger organization, you just wait for team members to come up to you and be like, whoa, what the heck? Like this went down. We were using this thing every day. And then you go, okay, no problem. Just hand it back to them. But when 30, 40% of things that weren't really being used go away, you don't hear anything. There's some proof in that. I think many moons ago, Mike, I was the beneficiary of one of your reviews on the marketing side, and then you maybe got an RFP out there, or got a proposal out there, and I snuck my way in there. So I think I appreciate that process.
Absolutely, did a great job too.
Yeah, no, there's some good stuff there. All right, number 6 then, going to the competition side of things. So number 6, being too worried about the competition. Maybe it kept you on your toes, but also being too worried about the competitor down the streets can create a lot of anxiety for really no reason. You learn most of the time they're just trying to do the same thing you are, keep up with day-to-day demand. There's a lot of business out there for everyone. What does kind of that process mean to you today of like being overly focused on the competition?
So I was an athlete, growing up in college. So I was just very competitive. So this is probably just more of me dealing with my emotional issues than anything else. But, I think there is a hint of this for everybody, always worried about the person down the street or your competition, or, hey, they signed this house, or they have this many properties, or they've done this, or they've done that. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you're in a market, a healthy market, there's generally going to be a lot of business for everybody, right? So focus on you. I guarantee you those same competitors are doing the same thing. They're looking at you going, man, what are they doing? That's so great. And then when the season comes, they're just heads down, just trying to keep their head above water, right? So for me, looking back now, I can look back, but it probably was a lot of unnecessary, anxiety and issues that I would always be worried about someone and what they're doing, when all I really need to do is, look ahead and keep plugging away. So just don't fall into that trap, I guess, is all I'm saying for those out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a market that did that, like Outer Banks. I don't know what it was. I remember walking into one of the first offices down in Outer Banks, and they were showing they had this one girl. She was doing nothing but tracking like all the other websites in their area and how they were doing on inventory and reservations. Obviously, this is pre key data, and I'm like, I mean, I'm sure this is important information, but is it really worth to have a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year person like doing this like all year long, just tracking all this?
I go one step further. In Topsail, I did it. I owned the company, and I was doing it. So, yeah, it became almost like it was therapeutic in some way, looking at this stuff. And but yeah, at the end of the day, it really didn't matter. I mean, just focus on your homeowners, that relationship, do good by them. You're going to be fine.
Well, I think Jeff Bezos says, focus on your customers, very similar to what you just said. Focus on your customers and let the competition worry about me, let them focus on us and don't worry about it. But this came up time and time again as a common mistake. And, a lot of the people talked about how actually extending that olive branch, actually, befriending, going the opposite way of it, befriending your local competitors was actually, the right strategy for them when they finally, did that. And that's one thing I didn't do. I actually didn't reach out to, any of our competitors when I had Vantage. And I probably wish I would have, because I've done it since, starting Vintory. It's been very successful for me here.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, back kind of to the tech and maybe software platform side of things, like we talked about a few minutes ago, Mike. Number 7 was being too tech focused on a team that wasn't overly techy, or wasn't overly maybe comfortable with some of the technology and tools that you were trying to roll out. So I loved your quote here at the end. Your team may not be excited about the tech you want to roll out. In fact, they might secretly hate it. So maybe if you have a fun story, you don't have to mention the vendor if you don't want to. We don't want to get anyone in trouble here. But like, is there a story of something you tried to roll out and the people were like, you learned they didn't actually want to do that thing or use that tool?
I'm pretty much every tool was like that, So someone who came into the industry pretty young. This is kind of the advent of HomeAway, VRBO, and things were really starting to evolve that way. I was looking at it from this different lens, like a lot of people are today. The younger crowd is today, going, wow, so many things we can do that just make this job easier. And as I progressed and then had my own company and started wanting to implement kind of everything, it was tough to sit back and remember a lot of the folks that worked for me were quite a bit older, and they were like, what are we supposed to do with this stuff? It just made their job a little bit harder when it was a little unnecessary. Probably a lot of the tools were unnecessary, but we wanted to be considered and viewed as very forward thinking and tech driven. And that most homeowners do not care about that, right? They just don't care. Now they do care if you're not cleaning the home correctly.
Mm-hmm.
They do care if they're not getting an answer timely from their emails or phone calls, or your home's being rented. So I would just say, as everybody especially as continue to talk about, tech enabled and tech focused, just remember who works for you. Again, going back to number one, does it drive the mission? And if it doesn't, just don't worry about it. Just move on. So
I could imagine every time you would go to a VRMA and you'd come back and your team would just like roll their eyes. They knew, oh shit, Mike's got another idea. He went to VRMA. He's got all these different tools he's going to implement now, and he's going to throw it on us to implement, and we don't want it.
Every single time. And I remember when they started coming out with the rate tools, right? We're like, hey, we're going to do this rate tool. It's going to automate the rates. And I could have had 3 heads. And they were looking at me, like, what? Are you kidding me? So sometimes there's a hill to climb. Sometimes it's great. It works out fantastic. Sometimes it crashes and burns, and you got a very expensive SaaS product sitting on the shelf over here that you're paying for till you can get out of a contract. So just be mindful of all that.
Yeah. I think if you look at it in that way, Mike, of like, it's a hill to climb, some hills are worth climbing. And then on the other side of it is a pot of gold, or like you said, maybe it does help you get more bookings, or it does help, the homeowner get a better property or something like that. But yeah, there's many things that you can get distracted by. And, then you get up at the other side of the hill and there's just a bunch of grass and nothing over there. And
that's right.
It's not maybe the best way to spend the time. Well, speaking of people and dealing with people, maybe this is a sore spot for you, but it's in your mistake list, so I got to pick at it here. But number 8, being too slow to fire. Hated that part of the job. Not a great people manager. Sometimes it has to be done, and it's not about you. It's actually about the entire team, and that bad hire can affect. So, well, Mike, if it makes you feel better, before I turn the question over to you, you are not alone in this. I mean, Mike or Brooke, this had to be one of the most common ones that we heard over and over again. But Mike, what was kind of your evolution here in dealing with people and figuring out ways to fire people when you needed to as the company got bigger?
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, my first management job, I was sort of just thrust into it. I was 25 years old, and I was the general manager of a large company on the Outer Banks, and that was tough, right? I mean, the only way to learn how to do that is to do it and have to, have those tough conversations and let people go. And so, as I got a little bit older and had a little bit more experience, you have to remember, I view the company as a team, right? And if you have A players, they don't want to work and deal with the B and C player bullshit. Excuse my language. So if you think of it in that perspective, would you rather keep the A player or risk losing that person to not deal with a sticky situation? And if you can think of it from that perspective, there's no question, right? You're just, as the manager, as the owner of a company, that's your job. And that's just one of the things that, come with signing up with it. So, still have struggled with that today, even in the new iteration of the business. But I mean, we still have to make the tough decision, or it's just not going to be made.
Yeah, I think I put a quote in the book, and it said something exactly what you just said. It's the quote was from Perry Belcher. He said, "Nothing will kill a great employee faster than watching you tolerate a bad one." Yeah. And you were right on with that. And Steve Trover calls it the 36 hours of suck. Right? It sucks for 36 hours. But then after that, it's like just a relief. Everybody's happy, much happier. The team is happier. You're happier. It's over with. And you know what? They're probably in a better place too.
That's right. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Number 9, more about kind of the community and dealing with the local side of things. So we'll go in this direction. Not being visible enough in the community. A lot of the most successful managers that are very active and visible within the communities that they serve. If you were to go back and maybe do things over again, you would participate more with like local boards, nonprofits, organizations. A lot of trust and goodwill is built this way with local stakeholders. So maybe it's something that you didn't end up doing, but what are some learnings or some adjustments you've made today with your current operation that you've done more in this local community?
Yeah, I think this is a big one. I mean, if you look back at a lot of successful managers and companies that have been around for a long time, I mean, they're just very active, right? I mean, they're leaders in the community. They're helping out, they're doing things, they're volunteering. I didn't do that. Not that I didn't want to do it. I just, my focus was, young family, business. I just felt like it was kind of a hassle. I was very involved in VRMA on the national front. So I thought that's where I should spend my time. And I'm glad I did. It was a great experience. But I think today we've really gone and be a lot more active locally. The Chamber of Commerce is, specific nonprofits, things like that. I mean, I think that's the next evolution of what we're going to do and what we are trying to do is, and that's not necessarily to help the business per se. It's to be a good community member right? Because we are very visible. We have these large assets in the community that are pretty important. So I feel like that's sort of our duty as we own them is to kind of give back and help out. So I would say, I don't have that personality, where I can just walk in a room and I'd be everybody's best friend, right? Like some of these guys could. So it's a constant work in progress for me. But we're trying to do it, one step at a time.
Yeah, there's a couple of people talked about this in the book. Lauren Madewell said something similar. Said, one of her biggest regrets was not involving herself within the community sooner. Chamber events and involvement, meet and greets, randomly popping in and meeting local mom and pop shop owners, forging relationships with local companies to offer guests and owners discounts, etc. It was so rewarding to have all these local relationships, and everyone benefits from it. And then Tom Goodwin, so with Mount Laurel, said the same thing. He wished he engaged with local chamber of commerce sooner. And then Paul Becker, Maureen Reagan. It just seemed like it was time and time again. And I didn't do it either. With when I had Vantage, we were not really that involved in the community, and I wish I did though.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's good to see. It's and people look up to large company owners like yourself, and they look up to you, and they kind of look to you when there's hairy situations. The only time I did speak up and got involved when there was problems, right? Hurricanes, COVID, and I was front and center, and I was trying to help out. But I need to do a better job just day in and day out. So then you're better prepared from a relationship standpoint when that does happen.
It's also one of those things too. I think, some of the clients that I've worked with over the years are like this, are very visible in the community. And it's like, where does brand awareness come from? It's always hard to pin it down. And, sometimes clients will think, well, I'm 100% responsible on the marketing side for the brand awareness. And I'm like, some of the best companies I've worked with over the years do things like this. Like, to give you a specific example, we have a client in Georgia, and they actually pay for off-duty police officers to go through the community on a day where typically there would be very little police coverage because there were some break-ins, in the community. So not just their houses, they're going and walking, this whole neighborhood, this whole community, off-duty police officers for everybody. And they let everyone know, hey, we are funding this. This is coming out of our pockets, and we're making sure that there's more safety and security, in this community. And so that makes them look good in the community, honestly. And it also makes, guests and homeowners feel happy too. So can we drive some ROI from that? Not really. Maybe we could make some argument that, someone saw the company logo on the truck they were driving or something like that. But it's one of those things that's sort of amorphous. It's hard to define, but then you remember it later on. Oh, who's someone that I might want to list my home with? Oh, it's these guys, because think of all the things they do in the community. They run I think they're with the local animal shelter. They run a annual thing where they try to get pets adopted, stuff like that. Again, these are all things that you can't really define. They're not really a part of any specific marketing activity. It's just things that make you remember the company. And then in that infrequent event of I need a property manager, they come to mind. So that's, right. that's things that I almost like to see too. When I'm looking for clients that I think are going to do well, is those types of investments that you can't always put some ROI or some, exact metrics on. It just helps people come like you, and if they like you, they're more likely to want to do business with you.
And I think Brooke would say this is correct, but the best homeowner referral you get is a hot lead from an existing friend of theirs, right? Whether it be a realtor, whether it be someone in the community, a neighbor, those are slam dunks, man. And that stuff you can't track that. The only way to get those is to do exactly what you're saying, and that's to put in the effort and the time to just be there, right? Nothing in return, right? But you're just there, and those are fantastic.
I've always said you never have to sell a referral. When a referral comes in, you just kind of talk to them, and it's a layup, And I'm the same way. If I'm buying a product, and if somebody refers me to them, I'm walking in, and I feel it's that social proof. I feel like I don't need to do my due diligence because they've already done it. And I just walk in. I'm like, all right, let's go. I won't beat them up on price. But if I come in out of the blue, a cold, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to beat them up. I'm going to just go through that demo. I'm going to beat them up on price. It's funny. I'm completely night and day difference if it is a referral. And I think, like you said, owners are the same way.
Your guard is up immediately when you're just walking in, as opposed to, right. Hey, Nancy down the road, told me to come talk to you,
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's like the worst thing that I think all of us want to hear, if we're selling something in our business, is like, oh, I'm comparing you to 5 other, solutions or 5 other options. I'm sure, Mike, you dealt with that over the years. Hey, I'm taking this home and I'm talking to 5 other people. Right, it's like, all right, I'm sure you still close some of them, right? Because, you and your team were skilled at, convincing them that they're the right value. But it's like pushing a rock up a hill versus pushing a rock downhill, right? Like the referral is a downhill one. You just got to nudge it and it'll run right down. The uphill one is like, you got to prove it every step of the way. So I think there's a lot of proof in what Brooke's saying for sure. All right, number 10, again, kind of a unique one. I don't recall this one coming up very often, honestly. Yeah, but it's a good one, Mike. Maybe we could spend a minute on this one. So only talking to my bank when necessary. So financing and capital is the lifeblood of the business. There was many opportunities over the years. I thought I could not pursue an opportunity because maybe a lack of funds or a lack of financing. It turns out your local bank likes to be courted as well. You got to date them a little bit too. VRMs are very good bankable clients, and they love to figure out ways to help you grow so that, of course, their deposits can grow. So what was your kind of relationship with your local bank over the years, and how did it improve over time?
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate. I mean, this was sort of when Town Bank out of Virginia came to the Outer Banks and they wanted to make a splash. And, they started working with a lot of vacation rental clients on the Outer Banks. So they were uniquely positioned to understand that business, right? Very uniquely to understand it. And as I opened up, we started working with Town Bank at our company that we owned. And, a lot of times I'd take deals to them, if you got to do your homework, right? You can't just walk in and say, hey, this sounds like a good idea, let's do it. But, they were more than willing to listen, right? More than willing to come up with solutions to help you pursue, because the more you grew, the more they grew, right? They want those deposits. They want you to continue to borrow money. You're a very safe client. You got to be established before you can do this. I would let me just put a caveat in there. You got to kind of be established, but don't. I would say don't immediately run and try to raise capital from private individuals, give up a bunch of equity in your business before you go and try to have these conversations with a bank. And pick these community banks that understand small business, that understand real estate or understand property management, and they're all over the place, because a lot of times that's going to be a much better deal for you to help you grow in the future, as opposed to giving up a chunk in your business. So that's what I would say. And I always love the term, I can't remember if you borrow too much money from the bank, then you own the bank or something to that effect. And it's almost real, like, don't be too worried. Obviously you got to perform, obviously you got to execute. But a lot of times they want to see you succeed as opposed to, take something away from you. So
I think there's a reason why Town Bank, I guess, came so hard after the short-term rentals, because they realized it's a great business for banks. Especially in the trust accounting state, where you've got all those assets, all those deposits on there. So you said something that I think that's actually spot on, is, partner up with like community bank versus some of these large ones. I mean, the funny thing is I've started my fourth business here, and I never really had a relationship with bankers until COVID hit, and I needed, help with PPP. Yeah. And I was with one of the big, I was with Wells Fargo, and I could not get them to respond to anything. And it was the most miserable experience. And I swore at that point I was going to not use one of the large banks anymore. So we used a more regional bank here around us here in Baltimore. And I have the guy, the senior VP's cell phone. I can text him anytime, anything I needed. And I wish I would have done that sooner for sure, because that cost me a ton of heartache when COVID hit.
Yeah, I mean, I would view your bank as part of your team, just like your CPA, just like your attorney. I mean, like, they got to be at that level, because there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, and they should be a part of it.
Yep.
Yeah. I want to clean up the quote, Mike. If you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. If you owe the bank $100 million, that's a bank's problem. I think that's where you're going for there.
That's what it is. Yes, that's what it is.
No, that's a good one though. I think that's worth getting down there. And interesting. The same kind of story, Brooke. I worked with a regional bank, then they just kept getting bigger and bigger, and then they bought banks, and now they're really not the same. And yeah, PPP, that was kind of a little bit of a point for me where I'm like, wow, I have no relationship with this person. And granted, I'm very small fish in a very large pond, I'm sure, in the broader scheme of things, but not really having any sort of relationship was a bit of a negative. And it's something that I changed. And then I got a mortgage, just my personal home, through a more of a local bank. And of course, he convinced me, oh, bring your business over here. He saw my numbers, and he's like, oh, let's figure out if we can get you over here. And he's been much more pleasant to deal with. Nice. So I think there's a lot of truth in that. Well, awesome. I know we're coming against it. We got a handful of minutes left, but Brooke, I think you got one more question for Mike. We got to slide in here as kind of bonus number 11 before we let him go.
Absolutely. So Mike, go back to your 25-year-old self. And if you were to give that 25-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I thought about this. I would say, if it was me, right, looking back, I would say enjoy the journey a little bit more, as opposed to always looking for the end goal. Mm-hmm. I was guilty of that. I just kind of always lived my life with a sense of urgency, right? Whether it be in sports or school or whatever it is, like sense of urgency. You got to get this stuff done. You got to do it right. So you miss a lot of the good stuff along the way. You feel like you look back and you're like, oh, wow, I guess that was kind of fun, unfortunately. So I would just say enjoy the journey. If you got a business, if you're working for somebody, you guys are growing, you're doing things right. Just sit back, take time to enjoy the small wins and enjoy it. So
love that.
I like that. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Mike, today. I really appreciate it. I think this was a good one. There was definitely some unique ones in there that we didn't hear from other folks that I think people can pull out of today's episode and apply to their business. So if you made it all the way to the end, we need a favor of you. One last thing for the listener. Go to your iTunes or Spotify. Your listeners, that's where we get the most downloads. Leave us a review. Give us 5 stars. We're not going to convince awesome guests like Mike to come on if they don't see some reviews and some people listening. So we thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And we'll catch everybody on the next episode. Thanks so much.